Hey everybody, I am super excited to be going live again today and talking about my book. I actually just finished listening to and rereading the chapter at the same time. So I'm going to give it a minute to allow some people to jump on here, to jump on this video. And hey Amber, hey Carrie. I'm going to give just another minute for a few other people to jump on before I dive into the book and some of the topics in the book. So I am super excited to be talking about the chapter today. It is the chapter on feeling with our hearts, chapter 3, and I was just listening to it, and I was just listening to it and reading it at the same time, which is kind of a fun way, a fun thing I like to do with books sometimes, to like take it in by all like different kinds of senses or all different kinds of approaches. So today I want to talk a little bit. The chapter's called Feeling with Our Hearts. And this one is all about getting out of our minds and into our hearts for decision making. And I use this quote that the best decisions come not from our heads, but from our hearts. That our heads give us the information that we need in order for our hearts to give us the answers that we're seeking. And one of the things I found, and I actually talked about this in a keynote presentation I did at Mizzou University, or at MU Health, and I talked to them about how when we are encountering challenges in our lives, we often try to turn everything into problems that have to be solved, because that makes it feel easier to deal with. So we start thinking, our brain starts spinning, how can we solve this? What do we need to do to fix it? How are we going to modify it, critique it, change it, develop it, especially in the workplace? And what we end up doing is trying to solve the problems with our minds, with our thoughts, that actually aren't problems. And what we really need to be doing is asking our hearts, what is the best next step for us to do? What's the best thing for us to do next, or what's the best next action that we can take in our lives? And so we end up just churning thoughts and stuck trying to solve or think our way through what is really a feeling problem, what is really what's going on inside of us, and what are we feeling. And I talk about a story in the book about watching the movie Encanto with my son, and that my son was super anxious. Like, he was jumping up and down on the couch saying he was so scared. Turn it off, I can't keep watching it. He was 5 at the time, and I knew it wasn't scary. I knew it wasn't. And so I kept telling him, like, it's not scary, Wyatt, stop, just get over it. It's really not scary. But he insisted he was scared. And it wasn't until I dropped into my heart and I said, okay, what's really going on with him, that I realized that it wasn't a scared emotion that he was feeling. It was a feeling of nervousness or anticipation. But he didn't know how to articulate that, right? He hadn't learned that emotion yet. He hadn't learned what that feeling was. So he was giving it the only label that he knew. And most of the time when I asked a room full of leaders this question at the MU Health Summit. I asked this whole room full of leaders, how many feelings can you name in 30 seconds? And I challenge you to try that. How many feelings or how many emotions can you name in 30 seconds? And there were few that can get over 15. Most people are down less than 5. And, I'm married to an engineer, and when I asked him that question, he could only come up with 3: sad, happy, and mad, right? And that is so true, because we weren't really taught that language of emotion, and then really integrated for us what that looks like or what that feels like in our bodies. And so what happens is, and that's what happened to my son in that moment, right? He didn't know what exactly he was feeling, or what was going on, or what was causing that reaction or that response. So it's so important for us to get into our hearts, to get into a space where we can understand what it is that we are feeling, what it is that we are experiencing, what it is that we are going through before we answer questions, before we solve a challenge or before we solve an issue. One of my favorite quotes when I was reading it this morning was, "Our hearts know the answers, but only when we let them feel the way to find them." And so often we're told to be analytical, to be non-emotional in our decision making, especially in a lot of corporate workplaces, which is, where I spent the bulk of my career, and surrounded by engineers who are certainly more prone to that more analytical, less emotional thinking. And so when we're in those environments, when we're approaching the world in that way, and we're thinking that the only way that we can find the answers is with our minds, with our analytical thought processes, we actually cut off a really important source of decision making and a really important source of understanding what the best thing is to do, or why something's happening, or why we're interacting the way that we are. And that can cause much more volatile or challenging outcomes when we're speaking from that space, when we're speaking from what do we think we should be doing, rather than what we know or feel is important, and what we know or feel we should be doing or want to be doing. And so it's so important to, when we're making those decisions, when we're looking for those answers, to really feel our way to find them. And this was really ironic timing, because last night my son was in a complete bedtime meltdown. He wanted, and I like to use my son as an example, he's really fun for example. He was in a meltdown. He wanted a bagel before bed, but it was already past bedtime and he needed to go to bed. He was exhausted. Mondays are always rough. I'm sure all the moms out there can relate. And so he was having this meltdown over wanting to have a bagel. And I knew he wasn't hungry. So I, after the first, natural response of like, no, just go to bed. We're not, doing it, which never gets anybody anywhere with a kid who's in a meltdown. I stopped and I slowed down and I started to think like, okay, what's he feeling? Like, what's going on that's causing him to want to eat something, to put something in his body to calm himself down? Like, there's something inside of him that's like telling him he needs to eat or he needs to consume something. And I learned this trick through my MBIT training, which is multiple brain integration techniques. And this is some of the neuroscience I talk about a little bit in the book, but I certainly apply to my performance practices, which is that we do something called swallow a smile. And I thought it was so hokey. So if you think that, I did too. But I was desperate last night as the mom. And so I tried it with him. And so what you do is you just smile and then you swallow it down to your gut. You swallow it down to your gut brain. And what I discovered when I had him do that, when I had him swallow it down to his gut brain, he almost immediately shifted. It almost immediately shifted his energy and his nervous system, and he calmed down instantly. And then I was able to have him lay his hands on his stomach, and I said, okay, so why is your tummy wanting you to eat something right now? What's going on? And he ended up talking about some struggles he's had at school, a new school, making friends, and he just was feeling uncomfortable, and he thought that was hunger, but it really wasn't hunger. He was just trying to soothe himself with sugar, with things that he knew would work. And so it was a really interesting, insight for me of, again, being aware of what are the real feelings, what the behaviors, the things we're doing on the outside that we would typically respond to with our minds are not going to give us as much information as feeling with our hearts, is really connecting to what's going on inside our hearts and what are all of those emotions. And so if you haven't before used an emotion chart, I do this in all my trainings, but it's so powerful to have an emotion chart in front of you to say, okay, what am I really feeling? Or what is someone else really feeling? What might really be going on here, especially with kids, but ourselves too, because we all do it too. Why am am I wanting to go for that midnight snack? Like what anxiousness feeling am I having? What is really happening inside of me? And until I can drop into my heart and connect with that feeling, until I can really get into a space where I understand what's going on, that's really, really hard to do. So we have to be able to name what that feeling is. And for me, when I talk about my story in the book, I talk about how emotional and dramatic I was as a kid. As a kid, I was all emotion, I think. I wore the label drama as a teenager with like a badge of honor, and I felt everything, lived everything fully. And then I got hurt really bad throughout my life. And I learned that that's not really welcome in the workplace. You know, full-blown feelings is not received well. When someone breaks down into tears, very few, at least the male leaders that I was with, knew how to respond or react to that in a helpful or productive way. And so I learned to shut all that down. I learned to wear this like veneer face of everything's fine, I'm fine, I can deal with it all, I can handle it all, I'm so strong, I'm so confident, I got it. Nobody see the cracks, nobody see the problems, nobody see the brokenness, and keeping all of the real feelings under the surface. And occasionally they would boil up, like I would share something in a desperate moment and feel the pain of that. And always there was some retribution for it. There was some, negative response from, others that were around me. And that caused me to go back into that hiding, go back into that, kind of closed off mode as a leader and as a woman in the workplace. And it took me a bit of work as I was doing this practice, as I was working through discovering myself again, to realize how important those emotions are and how valuable it is to develop the skill to identify them, rather than repressing that skill. Bringing that to the surface to understand what might be going on allows you to work through challenges much more effectively with much less drama. Because if you can understand the emotion, you can understand what might be causing the emotion and how best to deal with it, how best to move through it, or how best to navigate it. What never works is to try to deny an emotion. And especially in children, you can't deny their emotions. I mean, you can, but they don't have the ability to just compartmentalize at that age. It's going to come out, it's going to explode, it's going to come through. And what you're teaching them is how to compartmentalize, is how to stuff it down. And that is super unhealthy and not effective. And so it's just so important that we get into that space where we can make decisions from a heart space rather than a head space. And I really love the poem in this chapter. It might be one of my favorites from the book. So I'm going to read the poem here. So this is the poem, Heart Over Mind. Heart or head, which do you prefer? Head or heart, which of these comes first? Our heads help us to understand, to make sense of life, and help us comprehend all that we know and long to learn, all that we must process and discern. Our minds are so powerful, but with it comes confusion. They think so many thoughts, they can't even see the illusion. For there is no perfect answer that comes from our mind. Our heads are there only to help us find the question we must ask our hearts to give us direction. Our hearts are where we find the answers to our questions. To feel through our hearts and know what we must do, what actions to take, and know they are right for you. Our hearts must come before our mind. Our heads will always be behind. For in our hearts, we know what's true, and we'll find the direction that's perfect for you. I just think that is so beautiful. And I think it is so powerful to remind ourselves that when we're stuck in our head, some people call that the ego mind or our ego, that's when we're in a state of where we're more likely to jump into judgment, where we're more likely to jump into how could they, why didn't they should have statements, where we're more likely to cause ourselves suffering, and tell ourselves stories about our environment. But when we can drop out of that, when we can drop from our heads into our hearts and say, okay, what do I really need to know? What's really going on here? What's really happening here? And what am I really experiencing in this moment? And when we do that, when we drop into our hearts and we say, okay, what are we really experiencing? What are we really feeling? And what's really going on with us in this moment? That is when we can find the answer. And when our hearts give us answers, when we drop in, I like to say real reflection comes from our hearts, not our heads. When we drop into our hearts for real reflection and to give us those answers, to give us those insights, they don't necessarily come to us the same way our egos do. Our egos or our minds give us all these words and this detail and this, well, we could do this, or we could do this, or we could do this, or we could do this. And it's almost like a chatterbox. But our hearts give us more like an image or a single word or a single sense of intuition of just what's the right thing, what should I do next, or what really is happening. And so like in the story in the book Encantada with my son, when I dropped into my heart, I felt immediately, what is he feeling? Like it was like a question mark of what's really going on rather than a statement to that effect. And so you sometimes have to really learn to quiet your mind, to calm your mind in order to hear your heart, in order to hear those answers. I've had a lot of really great teachers give me a lot of advice in this space over the last year. But one of the easiest ways, the quickest ways is to do balanced breathing, is to just breathe in 6 counts, breathe out 6 counts. And to do that a few times until you feel yourself stable, until you feel yourself drop into a calm state. And then you can find that answer and then it will come up. But when we're all in fight or flight, when we're in our sympathetic nervous system, when we're amped up, when we're not gonna find that answer. We're not gonna feel that feeling or what's needed inside. So it's just so important to do that step. And then the work in this space. So the work in this space is, when you think about reconnecting to your heart, when you think about most of us disconnect. So it would not be surprising if most of you have had that experience, but thinking about how often you're letting your head make decisions versus your heart. Your head to decide, oh yeah, that's a good time to have dinner. Or, oh yeah, that's how I should spend my day. Rather than dropping into your heart and saying, what does my heart want me to do right now? What does my heart feel like the right thing is to do? What am I experiencing right now? When you make your decisions. And if you are disconnected, what are the steps you can do to get back to your heart? How can you spend some time doing the balanced breathing, spend some time in quiet, spend some time in nature is another way. Stand outside on the ground, on the grass, and just give yourself a minute to get grounded and then drop in so that you can start to connect with all those feelings and all those emotions inside to help you make better decisions. So those are my thoughts around the this is Feeling with Our Hearts. There's a lot of chapters here. This is Feeling with Our Hearts chapter. Tomorrow I'm going to do The Gift of Our Gut, which is a particular favorite of mine. I love the poems in this. And this was the last chapter I actually wrote in the book. And I will tell you why it was the last chapter I wrote in the book tomorrow. And I look forward to talking to you about The Gift of Our Gut tomorrow on live. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you guys enjoy, whether you watched it live or you watched this later, kind of getting to follow along. And if you haven't joined yet and you want to start participating or you want to participate along, you don't necessarily have to read my whole book, Fiercely Cherished Beings, in order, although you certainly can. And this is available on Amazon and it will be available on Audible any day now. It's under review, so any day now it should go up. You can keep checking. I'll obviously announce it once I see that it is up. So you may be able to listen to it as well. But if you want to kind of follow along with us, you can do that. And you don't have to start at the beginning. You can just jump in on the chapter that we're on and then go back and catch up if you want to. It's not essential that all these chapters are read in order. They certainly were not all received in order. I'll comment on that just for a minute. When I wrote this book, I thought it was going to come in like a guide, like, oh, here's the steps. And I say in the book periodically throughout it that it's really important to know that these are not steps, that these can come in any order in any way. I organized it in the best way, I think, logically for the mind, but you may be drawn to another chapter or another spot, and you should feel totally comfortable just jumping to that topic or that spot if you feel like you want to jump into that. But if you want to jump in with us tomorrow, we're going to do the gift of our gut, and we will be talking about that chapter and some insights or observations about it. I hope you have a wonderful day, and as always, as I end everything that I do, just remember to always keep evolving.